Some moments don't announce themselves as turning points until it's almost too late. Picture a room where the air has gone tight, where every breath feels watched, and where a single wrong word could trigger consequences that can't be undone. This was one of those moments. Tension had reached the kind of edge where pride and fear collide, and everyone present could sense that something irreversible was seconds away from happening. In situations like that, people usually believe power comes from volume, from dominance, from proving you won't back down. But that belief is exactly what gets people hurt. Right here, at the brink, one sentence stood between control and chaos. Not a threat, not a clever insult, just a line delivered with timing so precise it changed the direction of the night. You can feel the countdown in moments like these, can't you? The unspoken question of whether someone is about to cross a line they can never step back over. That's why this sentence mattered. It didn't just stop what was happening, it reframed who everyone in the room was allowed to be in that instant. And until you hear it, you're left wondering how something so small. There are rooms where history feels heavy the moment you step inside, where influence gathers quietly and everyone knows exactly who matters. This was one of those rooms, dressed in elegance yet humming with unspoken rules. Well-known faces filled the space, people accustomed to applause, favors, and doors opening without questions. Power sat comfortably here, disguised as charm and familiarity, but it was the kind of power that demanded respect even when no one spoke. The air carried contradictions. Laughter drifted easily, glasses clinked, and stories moved from mouth to mouth as if nothing in the world could touch this circle. At the same time, every gesture felt measured. You could sense it in the way conversations paused when certain figures entered, in the way smiles tightened just slightly. This was glamour layered over something harder, something that didn't forgive mistakes. Places like this are built on proximity. Celebrities, politicians, fixers, and men who preferred not to be named all occupied the same ground, not because they trusted one another, but because they needed one another. Fame needed protection, power needed access, and everyone understood the invisible lines that couldn't be crossed without consequences. That understanding created a tension that never fully left the room. What made the situation dangerous wasn't anger yet, it was familiarity. When people believe they know each other well enough, they speak more freely, forget the weight of certain words, and assume history will protect them. But history doesn't shield anyone. It watches, waiting for the moment pride outweighs caution. You could feel that moment approaching. The room had grown quieter without anyone asking for silence. Attention narrowed. The easy confidence that had once filled the space began to thin, replaced by an awareness that something important was unfolding. Everyone present understood the stakes, even if no one dared to name them out loud. This was not a place for explosions or speeches. It was a place where a raised eyebrow could carry more meaning than a threat, where reputation mattered more than volume. That's why tension felt inevitable here. When glamour and danger coexist, they don't cancel each other out, they amplify each other. And in that charged atmosphere, it only takes one sentence to shift the balance. People often misunderstand spaces like this, thinking power announces itself loudly. Here, power whispered, and those who ignored the whisper paid for it later. Every relationship in the room was layered with memory, favors given, favors owed, and debts that never truly disappeared. That history pressed in from all sides, making even casual remarks feel heavier than intended. In an environment like this, tension isn't created by conflict alone, it's created by restraint. Everyone is holding something back, everyone is calculating, and when so much is left unsaid, the smallest sentence can land like a verdict. It only waits for the right moment, and that moment was closer than anyone realized, closer than safety ever feels. When silence finally breaks, everything changes forever. Right then. Pressure doesn't announce itself with a drum roll. It builds quietly, almost imperceptibly, until the weight of expectation, ego, and circumstance presses down so heavily that every breath feels like a decision and every glance could tip the balance. In that room, people weren't just observing, they were measuring, calculating, feeling the subtle shifts in posture and tone that hinted at what might come next. Words carried more than meaning, they carried consequence. And when stakes are this high, restraint is fragile, often fraying before anyone realizes it. You've felt that, haven't you? That moment when the line between confidence and hubris is thinner than a whisper, and you wonder if what you're about to say could undo everything? The tension escalated not through grand gestures, but through small, deliberate acts, a hand tapping a table, a pause too long before answering, a glance that lingered just a second too long, all signals that something unspoken was boiling beneath the surface. The people in that room had reputations built on control and precision, yet even the most seasoned can falter when ego pushes against circumstance. Pride, after all, is both armor and vulnerability, and under enough pressure, it can crack. Every participant sensed it, the subtle trembling of boundaries as personalities collided and histories tangled. It is in those collisions that danger is born, not from overt aggression, but from the quiet miscalculations that escalate before anyone can intervene. Fear played its part as well, subtle but persistent, threading through the dialogue and body language. Not fear of the immediate, visible danger, but fear of the irreversible, the kind that makes you second-guess every instinct. When people are on edge, they read signals differently, react faster, sometimes too fast, and what seems like courage can become calamity. Anticipation hangs in the air like static, almost tangible, making every pause feel weighted, every phrase loaded. You can imagine the internal calculation: if I push now, will it save face or will it spark disaster? That question alone can be paralytic, yet it also fuels the drama as each person teeters between action and hesitation. The misstep that loomed was subtle, almost imperceptible. It was not a shouted insult or a sudden movement, but a combination of emotion and timing that threatened to undo decades of careful navigation. In those moments, restraint becomes a skill as vital as instinct, and the consequences of failing to exercise it are immediate and absolute. Every gesture, every word became a tiny spark with the potential to ignite an irreversible chain reaction. The pressure magnified human flaws, and even those who prided themselves on control were vulnerable to the simple truth that high stakes expose what we most fear in ourselves: loss of composure at the worst possible time. And yet, despite the building tension, there is a rhythm to it, a slow boil that heightens awareness without rushing. The escalation is deliberate, a study in human behavior under extreme conditions. You feel the weight of anticipation, the subtle shifts in energy, the emotional stakes rising with each passing moment. It's a lesson in how environments, relationships, and egos intersect to create situations that feel larger than life and yet intimately human. In those tense minutes, the room itself seems to breathe, waiting for the inevitable misstep that will force a choice between chaos and control. And as you witness it, you can't help but reflect: how often do we allow pride and pressure to push us to the edge without realizing how close we are to disaster? Seconds stretched like hours. Every movement became exaggerated in the mind, every breath a countdown, every glance a potential spark. The room was suffused with an almost tangible tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes you hyper-aware of the smallest shift in posture or expression. This wasn't a game, and everyone knew it. The stakes were immediate, personal, and terrifyingly close to irreparable. At that moment, violence was no longer theoretical. It was poised on the edge, ready to spill over the smallest provocation. You can feel it in your own body, just imagining it, can't you? That edge where the next second could redefine everything. That's the pressure the people in the room were living under, and it was relentless. The stillness before the storm made the anticipation even sharper. No one spoke, yet every heart was pounding with unspoken awareness. Silence in situations like this becomes a weapon. It stretches the imagination, forces the mind to calculate outcomes it would rather avoid, and magnifies the smallest error into catastrophe. There is a cruel rhythm to moments like these, where time slows to accommodate the weight of every possible misstep. Each participant in that room had their own calculations running, measuring potential consequences against instinct and pride. Every subtle twitch, every shifting weight of a foot, every glance carried meaning far beyond what was actually said. The calm before the violence made the danger almost unbearable. And yet, that calm is deceptive. It is not safety. It is a precursor. It is the eye of the storm, a moment that tricks the mind into thinking there is space to breathe, when in truth, the tension is climbing to its peak. Every silent second carries a lesson about human behavior under pressure. Fear sharpens instincts, but it also magnifies the instincts.
Misjudgments. What looks like composure may hide the precipice of disaster, and what seems like hesitation may actually be survival instinct calculating each move. In this delicate balance, the difference between action and consequence is infinitesimal, and the smallest misstep can ignite chaos. Pressure reaches its zenith when pride collides with threat. Words previously withheld suddenly feel necessary, and reasoning is overridden by the urgency of ego and survival. That collision is where conflict becomes unavoidable. You recognize it in yourself, don't you? That instant when the part of you that wants to assert control clashes with the part that understands the danger but feels powerless to stop it. It is uncomfortable, paralyzing, and above all, urgent. In that room, every person sensed that they were teetering on that edge, watching the next movement decide the difference between escalation and disaster. Immediacy sharpens perception. Every glance became a potential trigger, every subtle motion a precursor to escalation. Human instinct is remarkable under such circumstances. It detects microsignals we often ignore in ordinary life. Yet instinct alone cannot prevent disaster. It requires presence of mind, the ability to read the invisible rules, to anticipate the unseen pressures, and to act decisively without overstepping. The room seemed to contract, drawing everyone inward, concentrating the threat until it was nearly tangible. Each heartbeat amplified the awareness that control was fragile, that consequences were imminent, and that this was the moment when history could pivot on a single choice. The inevitability of what might come created a claustrophobic urgency that left no room for error, and every second counted in a way that can only be understood when you feel it pressing on you from every direction. It wasn't a line meant to impress, nor was it designed to outwit anyone in the room. It was simple, deliberate, and delivered with the kind of calm authority that makes you pause before reacting. You might wonder how a few carefully chosen words could hold such weight, how language alone could halt tension that seemed ready to erupt into something irreversible. That is exactly the point. Power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and in that whisper it reshapes the entire space. The sentence did not escalate the situation, it reframed it, shifting the perception of everyone present, reminding them that fear and pride are both negotiable when approached with clarity and presence. Could something so small truly redirect the course of human behavior? Yes, because the timing, the understanding of human nature, and the intent behind it converged perfectly in that single moment. It worked because it acknowledged the stakes without succumbing to them. Rather than raising a voice or issuing a threat, it mirrored the emotions in the room while offering a subtle escape from the path that was becoming inevitable. People underestimate the effect of calm in chaos, but calm communicates control, and control breeds respect. In that instant, the sentence did not argue, it guided. It suggested a choice rather than imposing one, creating a space where reason could re-enter a situation on the brink of irrationality. Have you ever noticed how a composed presence can silence panic and redirect attention without saying much? That is exactly what happened here, and it is the essence of strategic emotional intelligence. Understanding the tension, anticipating reactions, and gently steering them toward a safer outcome.
Expectations were subverted. Everyone anticipated confrontation, a verbal or physical escalation that would confirm the looming threat. Instead, the sentence disarmed, but not through charm or manipulation. It worked through recognition. Recognition that each person in the room had humanity, that pride and fear were not permanent barriers, but malleable forces when addressed thoughtfully. It was a reminder that even in moments of extreme danger, the most effective intervention is often subtle, human, and empathetic. Could anyone have predicted such a result? Likely not, because when fear has momentum, it blinds us to the simplest, most elegant solutions. Yet here, simplicity carried the weight of life itself, and it succeeded where aggression would have failed. Relief washed over the room, imperceptible at first, but undeniable once noticed. Hearts that had been bracing for impact exhaled, attention loosened, and the dangerous momentum dissolved. It is an extraordinary reminder that words, when rooted in understanding rather than ego, can be more powerful than force. What might have been a disaster became a moment of clarity, a pivot from potential chaos to controlled resolution. The sentence was not about cleverness, it was about insight, timing, and the courage to act with wisdom when everything else suggested confrontation. And in that careful, quiet intervention, the room and everyone in it was reminded of a profound truth. The most decisive moves are sometimes the calmest ones, and they carry a power that lingers far longer than the tension they resolve. The room had not immediately relaxed, though the tension had shifted. There was no applause, no audible sigh of relief, only the subtle, almost imperceptible recalibration of every person present, as if they were quietly measuring the new balance of power. That sentence had not only halted a confrontation, but had redrawn the invisible lines that governed behavior in that space. You might think that once danger passes, the story ends, yet in reality, moments like these ripple quietly, influencing decisions, reputations, and trust long after the immediate threat has subsided. How often do we underestimate the unseen effects of a single intervention, assuming that once the crisis passes, the lesson is forgotten? Here it was anything but forgotten. The consequences were quietly monumental. People began to navigate each other differently, recalculating their assumptions about strength, wisdom, and influence. Relationships that had seemed fixed suddenly appeared more fragile, yet also more nuanced. The person who had once relied on intimidation now understood the weight of restraint, while those accustomed to passive observation realized that careful action could carry far more authority than volume ever could. Status, in its subtle forms, shifted without ceremony or announcement. The room itself became a classroom, each participant a student in a lesson they had not expected but could not ignore. Can you feel how small decisions ripple outward, changing the context for all future interactions? Even beyond that night, the dynamics between the key figures were transformed. Trust was recalibrated, deference quietly offered, and the ability to intervene without force was a recognized form of power. It was a status shift that carried respect, but it also demanded responsibility.
Those who observed it later understood that influence does not always show itself through action that is seen. Sometimes it is felt in the decisions we make when no one is looking. What does it mean to hold authority quietly, without display, and how often do we forget that subtlety can outweigh spectacle in creating lasting impact? The echoes of that intervention followed each person into their subsequent interactions. Conversations that might have escalated to confrontation instead carried a thread of caution and reflection. It became a template for how tension could be navigated with timing, awareness, and empathy. The aftermath was not tidy, nor was it immediately comforting, yet it demonstrated a cause and effect clarity that few disputes achieve. Can you imagine the relief and simultaneous responsibility that comes from knowing one sentence has the potential to prevent irreparable damage? The understanding is both empowering and humbling, a reminder that wisdom often requires patience, courage, and restraint. In the long term, the night became a quiet benchmark for reputation. The individual who spoke with measured clarity was no longer just another presence in the room. They were a stabilizing force, someone whose judgment was trusted implicitly in moments of tension. The unspoken rules were reinforced and subtly rewritten. Threats are not the only path to compliance, and composure in the face of danger can redefine the balance of respect. And yet, the lesson was intimate, understood fully only by those present. For everyone involved, the awareness that a single moment could so profoundly shift relationships, trust, and hierarchy was indelible. What are the moments in your life that carry the same quiet, transformative power? How often do you pause to recognize the impact of calm, thoughtful action when the world seems ready to explode? Those who learn this lesson carry it with them, and the consequences, like ripples across water, extend far beyond the surface, shaping not only the immediate outcome, but the path of every interaction that follows.
True power rarely announces itself with noise or force. It does not need to intimidate, and it rarely relies on visible displays to assert authority. What makes an action remarkable is not the spectacle, but the intelligence and restraint behind it. In that one sentence, delivered with calm awareness, there was a lesson about influence that extends far beyond any single room or moment. Real strength is measured not by what you can break, but by what you can prevent from being broken. Have you ever considered that the most profound demonstrations of power are quiet, deliberate, and measured? That is the kind of power that transforms relationships, earns respect, and shapes reputations in ways that aggression never can. It asks us to reconsider our assumptions about courage. We often equate strength with action, with visible confrontation. Yet this moment showed that courage can also be the ability to hold back, to pause, to choose understanding over reaction. It challenges the identity many of us carry, that assertiveness must be loud, that authority must be imposed. Instead, it reframes strength as a subtle, almost invisible force, one that requires self-awareness, empathy, and timing. What might you accomplish if you approached conflict with the goal of resolution rather than domination? How often do we overlook the quiet interventions that prevent disaster and preserve dignity, believing only grand gestures matter? The emotional resonance of such restraint is profound because it reflects our shared humanity. Each person in that room, regardless of status or history, was reminded of a simple truth: fear, anger, and pride are temporary, but the consequences of how we manage them last far longer. It invites reflection on the choices we make when confronted with pressure and danger. Are we willing to risk comfort, reputation, or even ego to protect others? Can we recognize that our actions ripple through the lives of those around us, often in ways we do not immediately perceive? That awareness is a hallmark of maturity, insight, and ethical strength. This lesson is also inherently shareable because it resonates with universal values. Integrity, foresight, empathy, and courage are qualities that inspire reflection, conversation, and often imitation. People remember moments where influence was wielded without harm because it appeals to the part of us that longs for fairness and wisdom in a world that often rewards aggression. When we witness or learn about such interventions, we instinctively consider how we might apply the same principles in our own lives. Isn't that what makes a story timeless? The ability to reflect back lessons that are both personal and broadly meaningful? Ultimately, the significance of that one sentence lies in its capacity to elevate human behavior above instinctive reaction. It reminds us that restraint can be more powerful than force, that empathy can avert conflict, and that true influence comes from understanding, not intimidation. It challenges us to measure our strength not by the battles we win, but by the disasters we prevent, and to appreciate that the quiet, wise choice often carries the most lasting impact. What if we all approached moments of tension with that same awareness, that same courage? The lessons linger far longer than the incident itself, shaping how we see power, responsibility, and the enduring effect of acting with both wisdom and compassion.